History is often stranger than fiction, and if you look behind the polished portraits of historical figures, you're sure to find some pretty interesting tidbits, like the former US president who was actually pretty amazing at wrestling, and the famous inventor who apparently was a fart joke connoisseur. Hey y'all, I'm Christina and you're listening to History and Hearsay. We've been hitting some pretty hard topics lately, so I thought it would be fun to talk about something a bit more lighthearted for today's episode. Let me know which of these facts surprised you the most, or if you already knew any of these. Fart for freedom, fart for liberty, and fart proudly. Those words have been attributed to one of America's founding fathers, and while I personally think that would make a pretty great t-shirt, said founding father never said those words exactly. In 1781, Benjamin Franklin wrote an essay known as The Royal Academy of Farting, or simply Fart Proudly. It is universally well known that in digesting our common food, there is created or produced in the bowels of human creatures a great quantity of wind, that the permitting this air to escape and mix with the atmosphere is usually offensive to the company from the putrid smell that accompanies. Franklin wrote this letter to urge the Royal Academy of Brussels to urge scientists to figure out a way to make farts smell good. His suggestion was that maybe a medicine could be created that would counteract the effects that certain food had on the smell of flatulence. Franklin asserted that the value of a medicine that would make farts smell good would trump any of science's biggest achievements. Franklin argued that holding back gas could be painful, even life-threatening. If science could improve the smell, maybe people could break wind freely. Of course, this entire letter was really just a joke. Franklin was serving as a U.S. ambassador to France and living in Paris at the time, and was frustrated with the impracticality of most of the questions that the scientific community was wasting their time trying to answer. He heard that the Royal Academy at Brussels was requesting scientific essays and would award prizes for the best papers. This news annoyed Franklin because he thought that scientists were falling out of touch with reality. Year after year, they churned out pompous papers that didn't make life better for the common man. Franklin thought that science should help everyday problems. Science should, make farts smell good. So this letter was his way of kind of blowing off steam in regards to those frustrations, and he never actually sent that letter to the Academy. Instead, he mailed it to a few friends, Richard Price, who was a British philosopher, and Thomas Paine. Now, Price was a member of London's Royal Society and would have appreciated Franklin's jab at academia, especially its closing. At the essay's end, Franklin writes that science has derailed so far from reality that every discovery combined must be worth a farting. So, if you thought people in the olden-timey days didn't have a sense of humor, or that boys eventually grow up, you would be wrong. Now, we unintentionally have a bit of a theme here with the next one. Leonardo da Vinci not only painted the Mona Lisa, but he apparently also invented a stink bomb that could be launched with arrows. So it turns out that Leonardo was not only a gifted painter, but also a master perfumer. And while these two things don't seem to relate to one another, it turns out that they kind of do. Painters in the Renaissance often bought the ingredients for their paints and varnishes at a pharmacy. And some of the fragrant materials used in paintings, such as resins and gums, were also used in perfumery. And many other perfume ingredients could be acquired at the same pharmacy. So all of this would kind of just naturally enhance Leonardo's familiarity and access to these types of products. Now, as far as the stink bombs being launched from arrows, apparently this is something that he and his men did to scare away criminals. And I actually found a recipe for one of his stink bombs, and it's certainly not something that I would want to have launched at my head. It was a mix of urine and human feces, which were to be kept kept in a glass jar under a pile of manure for a month before being used as a stink bomb. And when you factor in that back in those days, people believed stench was responsible for spreading diseases such as the plague, it makes sense that fragrance would have been a pretty big deal back then. Now, just a little side tangent, there are some people who are trying to recreate the sense of smell that were in Leonardo da Vinci's paintings and connect that back to it, because apparently that was part of the art, not just looking at it, but each one of his paintings had a specific smell to it. So if you're interested in more about the science and all of that that's being done currently, I'll link that down below for you guys. Now, while I was exploring the lesser known facts about Leonardo, I came across a theory that suggests that he may have also been a murderer. Now, you probably know that Leonardo left behind a series of notebooks with his thoughts, and he had a lot of insight into the world around him. He had questions like, why is the sky blue? And many other things that would have been way ahead of his time. Clearly, he was a brilliant guy, but what I didn't know is that he left behind a set of cryptic Egyptian-type hieroglyphic writings called pictographs, which are believed to reveal the clues behind the mystery of the Mona Lisa. And some believe these to be a sorrowful self-defense murder confession to the death of his beloved model, valet, and lover. The pictographs are very complicated. They're written from right to left in Leonardo's backwards mirror writing style that apparently he liked to use. They contain little pictures of people, animals, plants, and birds combined with parts of Italian words. Leonardo wrote a set of fables which are believed to be the keys to these pictographs. Now, admittedly, I feel like this may be a little bit of a stretch, but if I had more time to look into it, maybe I would change my mind. Let me know if you've heard of this and what your thoughts are. Either way, while no one knows for sure how the model died, the official theory is that the man was more than likely killed by a French soldier. And I'll link my sources down below, so if you guys are interested, you can kind of look into all of the theories behind this one. He was in the backwoods of Kentucky in the early 1800s. His family was dirt poor. His mother died when he was 9, and he had a difficult relationship with his father. He went to school only every now and then, and it's said that his entire schooling amounted to less than 1 year's attendance. As a result, he was mostly self-educated, but he loved to read, and neighbors said that he would walk for miles just to borrow a book. But this difficult and humble beginning didn't stop Abraham Lincoln from going on to become the 16th president of the United States. And apparently, he was an incredible wrestler. The stories claim that he was only defeated once in approximately 300 matches. And while this is debated, as it's hard to imagine someone having that amazing of a record, it is a fact that Lincoln only had one loss that was ever written about, and he was a very skilled wrestler who was eventually honored with an award from the National Wrestling Hall of Fame in 1992. Better late than never, I guess. Growing up, Lincoln worked on his father's farm. After moving to Illinois, he clerked in a store, studied law, served in the Black Hawk War, and took part in political talk of the day. Now, the type of wrestling that was done back then was called catch as catch can, or frontier wrestling. Now, while we don't often associate wrestling with the 1800s, this type of wrestling was something that men who were part of the volunteer militia during that time would have been trained in as part of their basic training. And it was more of a hand-to-hand combat than a sport. Catch wrestling, or catch as catch can, basically meant like catch a hold anywhere you can. Now, I'm not going to pretend that I know anything about any type of wrestling, but this frontier style of wrestling had the goal of pinning or submitting the opponent by using any legal holds or techniques. And according to the information I found online, it emphasizes adaptability and seizing opportunities during the match with fewer restrictions than other wrestling styles. Techniques using or targeting the legs are allowed, submissions are allowed, and there are no mandatory grips. In the 1800s with this style, wrestlers wrestlers utilized wherever they could catch on their opponent, with the primary goal being to make the opponent verbally quit by using grappling techniques, including holds and dirty moves associated with the American style at the time. By the time he turned 21, Lincoln stood 6'4". He was lanky but muscular and powerful. He was noted for his skill and the strength of which he could wield an axe. He was a rough and tumble frontier man. When he moved to Illinois, he became a rail splitter, allowing him to earn some money clearing land and building farm fences. About that same time, he settled in a town called New Salem, and there he got a job as a storekeeper. On the side, this strapping young man liked to wrestle, and he was good at it. He would wrestle in county fairs and look for matches wherever the opportunity arose, and he built a loyal fan base of followers who loved to watch him wrestle. By some accounts, he wrestled for a dozen years, from his early 20s to his early 30s. And like I said, only lost one single match. Now, his most famous match happened as a result of a bet. Lincoln's boss boasted that his young employee was not only the smartest guy in town, but also the toughest. That comment riled a gang of thugs called the Clary's Grove Boys, which sounds really tough. His boss bet another man that his employee, aka Lincoln, could beat the toughest member of that gang, a man named Jack Armstrong. Now, Armstrong was the toughest and most feared member of the Clary's Grove Boys. Okay. Shout out if you know the Butter Creek Gang, because that's what this makes me think about. So a day was set, and on the day, the entire town gathered to watch this wrestling match. The two men stripped to the waist, and the wrestling began. The two were well matched, and the fight went on and got rougher and rougher. Then, well into the fight, Armstrong used a painful, illegal move, which infuriated Lincoln, who picked up his opponent, dashed him to the ground, and knocked him out. And this story, though there are several different variations of it, is the first written record of someone being lifted by their throat and slammed to the ground in a Western-style wrestling match. So Abraham Lincoln is credited with having invented the throat slam, which for some reason just kind of feels poetic to me. But if you're interested in a little more context behind this whole story, I have linked a YouTube video that goes into way more detail. I learned a lot from that video, so if this whole frontier wrestling world is of interest to you guys, I think you'll really enjoy that video. But wildly enough, Lincoln's fame as a wrestler is believed to have contributed to him getting voted into public office. That's how big his fan base was. Let me know if you learned something new in today's episode, or if you just enjoyed it, found it fun. And if you're interested in learning about the plot to steal Abraham Lincoln's body for ransom, go check out that episode next.